Walking like ducks, scrubbing baseboards for the camera, and playing games just to buckle a seatbelt? Jinger Duggar is peeling back the curtain on what really happened behind the scenes of her family's rise to fame. And let's just say it's anything but ordinary. From kodo marching orders to penny-pinching parenting tactics, we're diving into the jaw-dropping revelations that will make you rethink everything you thought you knew about the Duggars. Imagine being just 10 years old, and suddenly your quiet, quirky life is thrust into the glaring spotlight of national television. That's exactly what happened to Jinger Duggar back in 2004 when her family signed on for their very first documentary-style special, 14 Children and Pregnant Again. It was meant to be a simple introduction, a peek inside the lives of an unusually large family. But for Jinger, it was the start of something much bigger and much more overwhelming. On a recent episode of the Ginger and Jeremy podcast, Jinger Vuolo sat down with her husband to rewatch that very first episode, and the emotions came flooding back. She didn't hold back. "I remember being nervous," she said plainly, her voice carrying both the nostalgia and the weight of what that moment really meant. Cameras in your house, strangers telling you to act natural, all while your childhood is being captured and broadcast to millions. For a young girl, it was anything but natural. At the time, reality TV wasn't what it is today. There was no script, no glam squad, no social media following. It was raw, it was invasive, and it was forever. Jinger was just a child trying to understand why these people with boom mics and bright lights were now part of her daily routine. She wasn't auditioning for fame. She was simply doing what her parents said, following along with the plan as she always had. What made it even stranger was the directive the producers gave. "Try not to look at the camera." "Just do your thing," they told her. But how do you ignore a camera lens inches from your face? How do you act natural when you're being told not to acknowledge what's clearly right in front of you? Jinger recalled the awkwardness of it all. How unnatural it felt to pretend the cameras weren't there, even as they filmed every meal, every chore, every moment. It wasn't just an introduction to the world. It was an indoctrination into a very specific type of life. One where private moments became public currency, where childhood milestones were shared with strangers, and where personal identity took a backseat to family image. For Jinger, this wasn't just a TV show. It was the beginning of a life lived in the spotlight, a spotlight she never asked for but had to grow up inside of. That early nervousness wasn't just about stage fright. It was about realizing, on some level, that her life had changed, and not necessarily for the better. That small moment, sitting down with her family to introduce themselves to the world, was the first ripple in what would become a tidal wave of public exposure, family fame, and eventually, a complicated legacy. And for Jinger Duggar, that legacy started with a single, nervous smile in front of a camera crew she barely understood. Before the lights, the cameras, and the confessional interviews, there was the cleaning. Not just your average tidying up. This was deep, military-grade cleaning. According to Jinger Duggar, the days leading up to her family's first reality TV shoot looked more like preparation for a royal inspection than a casual documentary. And in a way, it was. This wasn't just about cleaning house, it was about presenting an image, the perfect image. On her podcast with husband Jeremy Vuolo, Jinger described in vivid detail how her mother, Michelle Duggar, launched the family into full-blown prep mode before the TV crew arrived. The house wasn't just expected to be neat, it had to gleam. Jinger recalled scrubbing white baseboards until her arms ached. The family had white walls, white trim, and high expectations, and every one of those spotless surfaces became a battlefield in the war for presentability. She made it clear their home wasn't usually a mess. In fact, the Duggars had a strict system of chores, routines, and cleanliness even without cameras. But when the show was coming, everything had to be perfect. "We cleaned like crazy," Jinger said, laughing now, but you can still hear the weight behind her words. It wasn't just about tidying up. It was about preparing to be judged, not just by the film crew, but by millions of strangers. This ritual wasn't a one-time thing. It became the norm. Every time filming approached, the entire house went into overdrive. Toys were put away with precision. Sinks were scrubbed, counters wiped until they shined, and floors swept, vacuumed, and mopped in succession. The Duggar children didn't just live their lives, they prepared for their lives to be seen, and that meant learning early on that appearances mattered. There's a deeper layer to this story. Ginger's recollection isn't just about baseboards and dust rags. It's about what happens when a family turns their private space into a set. The boundaries between real life and performance began to blur. Every corner of their home, the bedrooms, the kitchen, the living room, wasn't just home anymore. It was part of a narrative, a carefully managed stage. And for the kids, that meant pressure to smile, to behave, to keep everything spotless. Even before the first action was called, they were already actors in a story not fully their own. Ginger didn't say it outright, but the implications are clear. The house had to be spotless, not just for hygiene, but for judgment, for perception, for branding. The scrubbing ritual was a symbol of something larger, the need to be seen as perfect, to meet the expectations of a world that was about to watch every move they made. And in that relentless cleaning, we see the beginning of a theme that would follow Jinger Duggar for years, the performance of perfection, and the silent cost that came with it. In a house with 14 children, and eventually 19, managing chaos wasn't just a challenge, it was a daily mission. And Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar, they ran it like a small army, but instead of shouting orders or enforcing strict punishments, they got creative. They gamified obedience, and according to Jinger Duggar, it worked, at least on the surface. In her podcast with husband Jeremy Vuolo, Ginger painted a picture of what it really took to keep that many kids in line. And it wasn't always about discipline, it was about pennies. Yes, actual pennies. One of the earliest and simplest methods? A seatbelt game. When all the kids piled into the family's oversized 15-passenger van, Jim Bob would call out a challenge. Whoever clicked their seatbelt first would get a penny. Just one. But for a child, that small reward felt like winning the lottery. It wasn't just about buckling up, though. Ginger explained that this system expanded into chores. If you helped clean out the van, which with that many kids probably looked like a rolling disaster, you'd get paid. Not much, of course. Just whatever amount Jim Bob or Michelle decided was fair. But that tiny payment was enough to turn tasks into competitions. Who could clean the fastest? Who could remember to buckle first? It was all part of a running tally, like a never-ending game where obedience earned currency. It sounds innocent, even clever. But when you dig a little deeper, it reveals something more complex. These weren't just games. They were systems of control. In a household where individual attention was hard to come by, these little incentives gave the children something to strive for, something to win. But they also reinforced a message. Follow the rules, do your chores, and you'll be rewarded. Disobey, and you're out of the game. Ginger spoke about it with a mix of nostalgia and clarity. As a child, it made sense. It was fun. It motivated her. But now, as an adult, she can see what those games really were. A way to manage an enormous group of children without losing order. A way to motivate through micro-rewards rather than personal connection. And maybe most telling of all, the fact that these stories even stood out to her decades later says something about their emotional impact. The pennies weren't just coins. They were tiny tokens of approval. They were proof you were noticed, that you were doing something right in a family where getting noticed wasn't always easy. Incentives, games, rewards, they sound harmless. But for the Duggar children, these tactics were the foundation of a larger system, one built not just to manage behavior, but to maintain an image. A family that functioned, cooperated, smiled, and stayed perfectly in line. One click and one chore at a time. If there's one image that perfectly captures life inside the Duggar family, it's this. Nearly 20 kids walking in a single file line, youngest in front, oldest in the back, like a flock of ducks. And according to Jinger Duggar, it wasn't just a one-time thing for the cameras. It was a family ritual, a command, a system they called Code O. Code O stood for Code Order, as Ginger explained in her podcast with husband Jeremy Vuolo. But to the Duggar kids, it meant one thing: Get in line, literally, by birth order. The moment the phrase was called out, no questions were asked. The kids would hop into place like it was second nature. Youngest up front, oldest trailing behind. It didn't matter if they were in a grocery store, a church, or on vacation. If they were out in public, they were moving in formation. This wasn't some cutesy gimmick. It was order, control, and predictability in the face of what could have easily been chaos. Imagine trying to shepherd 19 kids through a parking lot or down a narrow hallway. The Duggars didn't just walk, they marched, and every child knew their position in that invisible chain of command. Fall out of line? Jinger said it wasn't even the parents who corrected you, it was your siblings. Hop in line, what are you doing? She remembered them saying. The system worked, but it also sent a subtle message. Individuality didn't matter as much as order did. Your place was defined not by personality, not by age and growth and discovery, but by your number, your spot, your position in the pecking order. Ginger's tone when describing it was a mix of amusement and reflection. Sure, it's funny in hindsight, the visual of a massive family moving in sync like ducklings crossing the road, but it also reveals just how deeply structure and submission were ingrained into their daily lives. It wasn't enough to obey, you had to visibly obey, to conform, to keep the Duggar machine running like clockwork. And the truth is, that's what the outside world saw too. In the opening credits of 14 Children and Pregnant Again, the family lines up in, you guessed it, Code O formation. It became part of their brand. That neat, orderly, smiling parade of children was a visual shorthand for what the Duggar family stood for: discipline, obedience, unity. But behind the smiles was a deeper reality, one where breaking from the line wasn't just discouraged, it was unthinkable. For Jinger, Code O is now a memory, a symbol of a life that once felt normal but now seems surreal. Because walking in birth order might keep the crowd together, but it also keeps everyone in their assigned place. And sometimes that place wasn't where a child truly belonged. It took Jinger Duggar growing up, getting married, and becoming a mother herself to realize just how unusual her childhood really was. For years, she believed the way she was raised, the routines, the rules, the games, the structure, was completely normal. After all, when you grow up in a world of white baseboards, chore charts, and 15-passenger vans, it becomes your reality. But stepping outside that world changed everything. On her podcast with Jeremy Vuolo, Jinger reflected on this awakening, how she only began to question her upbringing when she saw what life could look like outside of the Duggar bubble. And for the first time, she could see the Duggar household not just as a loving home, but as something far more complex, a place where control, image, and routine ruled the day. She spoke candidly about things most families wouldn't even think twice about, like transportation. While many families pile into a compact SUV or a minivan for errands or outings, the Duggars traveled in a full-size shuttle bus, not just once in a while, all the time. Because with that many kids, a regular vehicle didn't cut it. But to Jinger, that wasn't strange. That was just life. It wasn't until she began to raise her own children that she realized how rare, and frankly, overwhelming, it must have looked from the outside. And it wasn't just the size of the vehicle, it was the size of the family itself. My mom having all those kids is huge, she admitted. Jinger was one of 19 children, all homeschooled, all following the same tightly held beliefs, the same rules, the same routines. At the time, she thought every family did things that way. Now, she sees the truth. They were living inside a world few could truly understand. Looking back, Jinger acknowledged that everything about their life was designed to function as one seamless unit, from lining up in birth order to cleaning the house like a hotel before every film crew visit. It was efficient, yes, but it also didn't leave much room for individuality, spontaneity, or personal exploration. In her words, "We did a lot of things differently than even your normal family." That realization didn't come all at once. It came slowly as she began to live a life of her own, a life where she could make different choices, where she didn't have to follow Code O to walk into a store. Today, as a mother herself, Ginger has a new perspective, one filled with both gratitude and questions. She doesn't speak with bitterness, but with clarity. Her childhood shaped her, but it also sheltered her, and now she's peeling back those layers piece by piece to understand what was loving discipline and what was simply control wrapped in tradition. Because sometimes it's only when you step outside the bubble that you can finally see it for what it was. For years, Jinger Duggar smiled through the spotlight, but now she's rewriting her own story. What other secrets lie beneath the surface of America's most famous fundamentalist family? Hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell, because here at The Fame, we're just getting started peeling back the layers.